Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. In a recent article, the Wall Street Journal reported that Facebook had consciously avoided applying hate speech rules to members of the ruling party, that's the BJP, when they were in fact found guilty of the same. This, of course, is contrary to some moves that Facebook has made globally in terms of white supremacist language and literature that was posted on the website. The article also alleges that Facebook has apparently consistently told its staff members that punishing violations by politicians from the ruling party will damage the company's business prospects. It's not the first time these allegations have been raised. They were pointed out by the New York Times as well last year. And the two gentlemen that you see over here actually wrote a book in 2019 detailing not just what's happening in terms of these one-off violations, but also what happened systematically in the run-up to the general elections in 2014 and perhaps in 2019 as well. Joining me to talk about that are the authors of the book, Paranjoy Guha and Cyril Sam. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining in on this conversation. I think a lot of what's happening is a very here and now sort of reaction. So I want to, with your help, trace back this journey of Facebook and the ruling government. Paranjoy, let me start with you. What is your sense of when trouble actually started in Facebook's image in India and when it became apparent that this was more than a social media platform?
Mitali, what Cyril and I have documented in our book, which was published in April of 2019, is that the association of senior executives of Facebook in India with the Bharatiya Janata Party and with Mr. Narendra Modi in particular, since the time Mr. Modi became Prime Minister in May 2014. The association was very close when Mr. Modi was the Chief Minister of Gujarat. Even before our book was published, we published a series of founded in the book where we clearly documented not one, but dozens of examples of how Facebook was in a sense complicit with India's ruling regime. One journal article of the 15th of August highlights is that even within Facebook in India, there were people who were opposed to Facebook continuing pages of individuals associated with the Bharatiya Janata Party that they themselves felt would qualify to be under the category of hate speech, incendiary speech, speech that could have the potential of creating enmity among different groups in society, notably Hindus and Muslims. It could lead in public disorder. And what is also very clear in that Wall Street article, that Ms. Akhi Das in particular, who heads their public policy activities in India and this part of the world, together with people like Shivnath Thukral, who is a former television anchor, they overruled the objections raised by Facebook's own staffers. And this was known to Facebook's headquarters in California, in Menlo Park. So the Wall Street article, which hasn't been denied, kind of establishes the proximity of the top brass of Facebook in India with India's ruling dispensation.
Cyril, the thing about your book is also that I think you've laid out the size and the magnitude of the machinery we're talking about. I want to draw you into, and I want you to tell our viewers about what you detailed in the period of 2017 when Uttar Pradesh was going to elections, and how BJP worked not just with Facebook as the social media platform, but more importantly with WhatsApp, and by their own admission, 32 lakh people within that WhatsApp community, where they were doing this systematic targeting. What is it that you found, Cyril?
Here's what we found. I think what we found is that Facebook actively trained members of the BJP in how to use Facebook, how to use WhatsApp, how to use them effectively for election purposes, for campaigning purposes. And we know how BJP, for example, ran its missed call campaigns, after which the party became one of the largest political parties in the world. All of these were data collection techniques. All of this data was used to further the campaign on Facebook and WhatsApp. This was not something that was extended to other political parties. In fact, I don't think even to this day, the principal opposition party, which is the Congress party, has access to a proprietary tool that Facebook offers to publishers, political parties, marketers, advertisers, and everyone else who is engaged in any form of publishing on Facebook, called CrowdTangle. The Congress party does not have access to CrowdTangle. I mean, it did not have, when we published the book, it did not have access to CrowdTangle. I don't know if things have changed since, but that was one of the things that members of the Congress party raised again and again, that we don't have access to CrowdTangle. Now, I mean, it's essentially, you're instead of helping create a level playing field, you're ensuring that there is no level playing field.
May I just add a few points to what Cyril said?
Yeah.
You know, the first chapter of our book, we begin with a particular egregious example pertaining to Mr. Amit Shah, who was then the head of the Bharatiya Janata Party, who is now the Home Minister of India and arguably the second most powerful person in the country. On the 22nd of September 2018, he was addressing a public rally of social media volunteers of the BJP. And he remarked, "We are capable of delivering any message we want to the public, whether sweet or sour, true or fake." This is the English translation of what he said in Hindi. Now, to contextualize what he said, you know, before the Uttar Pradesh elections that took place in February, March of 2017, they had put up these groups of WhatsApp followers of the BJP, over 3.2 million. And every morning, and this is the really ironical part of it, it was every day at 8 a.m. they would send these messages saying, "Know the truth." And this was ostensibly meant to counter false information. Now, one particular volunteer put out a fake bit of information that the then Chief Minister of UP, Uttar Pradesh, Akhilesh Yadav, had allegedly slapped his father, Mulayam Singh Yadav. That this was completely fake. And it reached Amit Shah. Now, the interesting part of the story is that Amit Shah then said that an environment, ek mahol tayar ho gaya. And as the members of the audience smirked, Mr. Amit Shah lovingly chided them, his tongue firmly in his cheek. And this is what he said, translation: "This is something worth doing, but don't do it." Do you understand what I'm saying? So this is one example, and there are many, many other examples of how WhatsApp was weaponized for political propaganda by the BJP.
Rancha, I want to go back to that Wall Street Journal article, which makes it clear that, the prime sort of communication that was given to Facebook employees was that this would damage business prospects. How important is it for Facebook, to your mind, in order to keep the ruling party happy, to protect their own business interests? Because ultimately that's what it's boiling down to.
Facebook is a privately owned corporate conglomerate. It is one of the biggest in the world. So that Mr. Mark Zuckerberg's company wants to maximize its profits should not be any secret to anybody. But the way they do it is where the questions arise. Essentially, Facebook is huge. And when I say Facebook, I include WhatsApp. You have 900 million voters in India who were eligible to vote in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections. I mean, that means they were above the age of 18 on the 1st of January of 2019. It's not 2018, 2019, I stand corrected. And compared to 900 million, WhatsApp claims 400 million subscribers. That's how huge it is. Now they're in the business of making money. Across the world and also in India, they've aligned with ruling regimes, in particular right-wing ruling regimes. Whether it be Myanmar, where the United Nations or an official of the United Nations has pointed out how WhatsApp was used to incite hatred and resulting in killings against Rohingya Muslims. In New Zealand, Facebook, a person, a gunner who shot down people outside a mosque in Christchurch, that was shown live. There are many complaints in different parts of the world, and including in the United States. Facebook's own employees were opposed to putting out content which Twitter took down, which US President Donald Trump had put out on the ground that this information could be hateful.
Yeah.
And they claim end-to-end encryption. They invoke the First Amendment of the US Constitution, the right to free speech. They talk about privacy. These become covers for them to put out just about anything they want to. And when it's pointed out to them, they prefer to look the other way because it's bad for business.
Cyril, let's talk about that WhatsApp side of the story for a bit, because I think, as Paranjay pointed out, for markets like India, clearly WhatsApp is the more powerful tool. And as you have detailed in your book as well, there have been 3 or 4 instances where there was a violent repercussion to these WhatsApp messages. But when you dug deeper, what did you find about how serious the WhatsApp management, which is essentially the Facebook management, was about addressing these issues of hate speech and violence? Because I think you found something else, right? Their eye is not on addressing hate speech, but on addressing their payment gateway.
For Facebook, a lot of these are not problems that need to be addressed from a platform or a software point of view. For Facebook, these are PR issues. So with WhatsApp, I think the first instance of WhatsApp which was documented was the 2013 Muzaffarnagar riots. There was a story that was done in the Hindustan Times. I think it was a long, detailed data story that was done in the Hindustan Times around that time, where the reporter goes on to say that the riot was completely coordinated on WhatsApp. When we dig down further, what we find is that every case of lynching that happened in India between 2014 and 2017, everything can be linked back to WhatsApp. What does WhatsApp do in response? WhatsApp releases a whole bunch of funds for Indian researchers and academics. What are the kind of things that they're doing? I was in a closed door meeting at one point where you had academics from Indian universities who were arguing that fake news problem on WhatsApp is not a platform problem; it is a human problem. It's as good as saying that guns don't kill people; people kill people. Subsequently, before the 2019 elections, Facebook released a press release saying we are going to start a fact-checking tip line. Every Indian newspaper went and published it on their front page. No one followed it up. I think 2 days later, BuzzFeed US followed it up. They found that this is not a fact-checking tip line. They published the story. Facebook then retracts that press release and says that, oh, this is not a fact-checking tip line. This is a research. This is a research project. We are not going to. 2019, 2020. We are 2 years down. We are in the second year since the election. Do we know what happened to that research report? Do we know what became of that research? Who did the research? What were the findings? We don't know anything. And the fun thing is that they have a complete grip over Indian media because everyone in some way or the other is financially dependent on them. Yeah. And you have your policy officials, your Facebook's policy team is essentially, it's a revolving door between Indian media and policy departments of technology companies. So you have friends and friends of friends who are doing all of this.
Yeah.
But we don't want to report it because, they are friends and friends of friends and they give us money.
Yeah. Most of them are former.
May I add a few points?
Yes, Paranjay.
May I add a few points to what Cyril said? We had this particularly ghastly example of Shambhulal Regar from Rajsamand in Rajasthan, who brutally murdered a Muslim laborer from Bengal, ostensibly because he was this so-called love jihad. He was trying to entice some Hindu woman. Now, this entire gruesome murder was actually videographed. by one of his relatives. But when the cops, the police said, can this be used as evidence? You know, Facebook throws up its hands. He said end-to-end encryption. We don't know who's put it out. We don't know to who it's gone. A few years ago, representatives of WhatsApp met Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, minister, and the same issue was raised. What do you do with heinous crimes, murder, rape? So until and unless you actually seize the mobile phone, does that become evidence? Yes, WhatsApp is now being used as evidence in courts of law. It's being used. But the point is, in every instance, in the name of its end-to-end encrypted technology, WhatsApp and Facebook washes its hands off responsibility of what is put out. Cyril talked about Muzaffarnagar. I mean, most recently, what you saw in Bangalore, in Bengaluru. There have been, as he rightly pointed out, every instance of a mob lynching, every instance of a major communal conflagration, you'll find behind it there is some nasty bit of information put out on WhatsApp.
Mm. Paranjay, I mean, as you have detailed, this has been going on since 2014 in a very heightened manner and perhaps before that as well. Tell me why you think no one has raised a formal complaint about it. I mean, I saw that after the Wall Street Journal article, Dr. Tharoor said maybe a parliamentary panel should be set up. The Delhi government has said, we're going to summon the Facebook officials, but not with any degree of seriousness. How come no one from the opposition has taken this up, with the cudgels that they should?
Maybe they should have done it much earlier, but you meet the same response. You get the same response from all these people that, these are quote unquote intermediaries. There are so-called safe harbor provisions in the information technology intermediary rules. So they say we are not responsible. But you're right. The opposition should have taken this up much earlier. Honestly, when Cyril and I wrote this book, we had a packed auditorium when the book was launched in April 2019, but that was it. Suddenly, Wall Street Journal does the story, and before you know it, everybody's again, remembering the work that we did. The point is, it's important to note one other thing. Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, in his article in the Times of India, alleges that there was sort of hatchet job by a left-wing group within Facebook to tarnish its operation. I find that truly amazing what Mr. Chandrasekhar has claimed. The Wall Street Journal is owned by a corporate group owned by Mr. Rupert Murdoch. And whatever you can accuse Mr. Murdoch of, you can certainly not call him a leftist or a supporter of left liberal causes. Mm-hmm. But when the Wall Street Journal puts it up on its front page, everybody wakes up. And now there's talk about a joint parliamentary committee and inquiries and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Cyril, I want to bring the focus back to the business aspect of this. And I was drawn by one piece in the book that you both wrote where you questioned one of the protagonists and asked them who needs whom more. And he said, I'm not sure if Facebook needs BJP more or the BJP needs Facebook more. But it's important, isn't it, Cyril, for Facebook to ensure that content goes viral, first of all. And it's also important to keep the Indian market happy because they're shut out of the largest market, the largest potential market, which is China. And in India, the numbers are actually growing really well for Facebook.
Sure. I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying. They have to ensure that there is a high degree of engagement on their apps and services, and they need to keep the government of the day in power happy if they have to grow.
And do you think
anything and everything, they need to keep the government happy.
So do you think
just look at the Reliance
the specific data scraping that happened, Cyril, within India, where I think for the first time, things were cut not just across lines like gender or age group. You also had a cut across religious lines. Have you seen examples of that happen globally for Facebook, or was this an India special?
I think it was an India-specific thing because that's how electoral processes work in India, where it's easier to categorize people along caste and religious lines. I don't know if that would possibly apply to any other country.
Mm.
If I can add something, Cyril mentioned Reliance Jio.
Yeah.
Reliance Jio has a small payments bank. Now, WhatsApp had been lobbying for years to get the Reserve Bank of India's permission to start its payment service. Now it has that permission. I mean, why had it been lobbying? Because Google Pay had received permission, but it had not. And the whole issue was the issue of data localization, whether the financial data should remain within the country or not. Now it's all done. At a time when the Indian economy has collapsed, it's shrinking. Here we have Reliance Jio, owned by Reliance Industries Limited, headed by India's richest man, Asia's richest man, one of the world's richest men, and the biggest conglomerate of its kind in the world coming together. And Facebook invests billions of dollars in Jio platforms. So we see a coming together of a global digital monopoly with an Indian digital big weight, because today Reliance is the biggest provider of telecommunications as well as mobile internet data services.
I mean, that deal was cleared by the Competition Commission of India in 20 days.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. I mean, that's thousands of pages of filings that need to be cleared by the Competition Commission of India. 20 days, you clear a deal. Okay.
As opposed to a Caravan article that took 11 days to get clearance, right, Cyril?
Yeah.
Paranjoy, I want to go back to the point you were making about conflict of interest in terms of Facebook employees. And the larger observation seems to be that they are symptomatic, but not the problem. There's news this morning from BuzzFeed that a senior engineer in the US has been fired because he collected evidence showing that Facebook was giving preferential treatment to right-wing accounts. So the problem really seems to be, you can remove individual A and replace with individual X, but this system is not going to change.
Mitali, Facebook is a behemoth. It's a huge corporate conglomerate. God knows how many thousands or tens of thousands of employees it has across the globe. Now, there are always going to be some people within whose conscience will be pricked. Now, not all of them become whistleblowers, but when you join Facebook, whether in India or any part of the world, you sign these contracts, these non-disclosure agreements, etc. But despite all that you sign, there are some people who believe that what is happening is going against their own ethical standards, their own principle, and above all, their conscience. So that is what has happened also within India. Because in a sense, what the Wall Street Journal was able to document was also because there were internal leaks from within. And because there were internal leaks from within, whether it came from Menlo Park or Delhi, they were able to follow it up. And if you look at the official statement that was put out by Facebook and WhatsApp, they acknowledge that there are some limitations. Remember when Donald Trump had put out information which Twitter took down, even at that time, there were employees of Facebook who protested. So however much you sort of shut people's mouth or try and shut people's mouths up and show them the letter of these agreements, the NDAs or the non-disclosure agreements, there will be some people, I think, for whom their conscience and their ethical principles may make them act in a different manner, and not exactly the manner Mr. Zuckerberg and Ms. Sheryl Sandberg would like them to act.
So let me sort of, end our conversation with a final question to you both. Cyril, you can go first. Where do you see this ending up? It's not like we don't have more important elections coming up. There's West Bengal that's right around the corner. And the impression seems to be that with Facebook, it's only when there are consequences, as there were with Black Lives Matter. And there was some pull-out of advertising, certainly not enough to cause a dent, but some pull-out of advertising. How do you think this is going to sort of unravel itself or play out in the Indian context?
I mean, we've given up on the story. Who's reporting the story? Who's taken forward the story? I mean, I don't think anything is going to happen. Also, because I don't think this is something that came from someone who was very worried about what is happening in India. I mean, Facebook employees have, and especially Facebook's policy team has kept quiet for 10 years. And this is something that every reporter who reports on Facebook in India has trouble with. No one in Facebook talks. So it is very unlikely that someone decided to talk all of a sudden. It is, and what I think has really happened is that it is an internal hit job on Ankitas. This is an internal, internal Facebook politics that's playing out in the public. This is not someone who has suddenly found their conscience and decided to speak up.
Paranjoy, does it look like a 72-hour storm that will be gone before you know it?
I would like to be a little less cynical than Cyril, but for all you know, he may very well be right. Whether it's an internal hit job or a hatchet job, that's the same language that Rajiv Chandrasekhar is using. Now, I would like to believe that there are people with conscience among the God knows how many thousand employees that Facebook has across the world. I mean, it's just a young organization. It's barely 16 years old. Mr. Zuckerberg is a little over 40 years old. What am I saying? Elizabeth Warren had suggested that they break up Facebook in the same manner in which by law, by American law, AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph, the conglomerate established by Alexander Graham Bell, was by statute broken up. The manner in which Standard Oil or Esso was broken up. Whether that will happen, time alone can tell. What Australia has suggested, that you're distributing our content, you should pay something to those who are creating that content. You call yourself a tech company and not a media company, but you are effectively the biggest disseminator of information. Now, how this will play out in India, difficult to say. It's already a sort of a tu-tu, meh, Congress, BJP, CPM, all that. We don't know whether a joint parliamentary committee is set up. And if a joint parliamentary committee is indeed set up, and they summon Ms. Akhi Das and Ms. Shivnath Thakral and others to speak, I do not know what that could lead up to. It's difficult to predict the future, but I would like to believe that thanks to the brouhaha, the hue and cry generated by the Wall Street Journal article, even if it lasts for a short period of time, a few more people have become a little more aware of the other side of the coin. That these are not agnostic, neutral platforms that enable you to connect with your old schoolmates and distribute pictures that you like. That there is a dark, ugly side to the manner in which these platforms are used. That you are told you're getting the service free, but your data, your behavior is being monetized and sold to advertisers. And even if what Cambridge Analytica did is a different story altogether, but you realize at some point of time that it's your behavior that's providing the monetary surplus to this corporate conglomerate.
I mean, another important thing is that what the Wall Street Journal story says is that Facebook went out of its way during the elections to help the BJP. Now, that essentially signals that you have a foreign corporation that is meddling with your country's politics and election. Right now, no one is looking at those aspects of the story. Everyone is looking at how Ankitas is a victim, how this is a slugfest between the Congress and the BJP. Or that this is how you conduct business in India. Yeah, I mean, your democracy is under threat. This is what Indian journalists are talking about. I mean, all the best, hoping that the story is going forward.
Yeah, you can also read what Pawan Khera issued a long statement about everything that's been happening and all the examples. But, the point is, yes, it's not just you're meddling with political processes, electoral behavior, political preferences, with democracy in what is supposed to be the world's largest democracy, but you are getting the active support of the ruling dispensation. This is really what the Wall Street Journal article highlights. And also what is very important, it also highlights that soon after they send the questionnaire, they hurriedly pulled down a couple of these posts. So obviously it hit them when they took notice of it. It may not have hurt them in the same way as when Coke and Ford, withdrew advertising after Black Lives Matters. But let's see, early days. I'm just a little more hopeful than I was maybe a few months ago or a few years ago, that more people will become a little more aware of the working of these social media conglomerates.
Indeed. And I think aside from the danger of democracy, it's also amplifying one and stamping out the voice of others. So that's a very, very real threat. Great work from both of you, of course. I know it's a bit delayed in coming, but congratulations on your investigative work. And let's wait and watch on this one. But thank you for your time and
Thank you.
all your honest thoughts today. Thank you.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.